Have you ever had that feeling like someone's watching you, even though you know you're alone? I've heard people talk about it before, but I never really believed it until it happened to me. And it wasn't in a place where you'd expect, like a haunted house or a creepy old building. No, it happened to me in one of the most ordinary places, a subway station. It started like any other day. I was commuting to work, like I always did, taking the same subway line that I'd been using for years. The station, though old, had never seemed sinister to me. People rushed past, caught up in their own lives, never really stopping to take in their surroundings. But that day was different. I stepped off the train and headed toward the exit when something caught my eye. At the far end of the platform, there was an old, rusted gate that I had never noticed before. It looked ancient, as if it had been there long before the station was modernized. Behind the gate was a narrow staircase that led downward into the dark. I'm not sure what compelled me to approach it, but something about the gate drew me in. As I got closer, the air felt colder, unnaturally so. The busy sounds of the subway seemed to fade into the background, and a heavy silence took their place. The gate was slightly ajar, the lock rusted and broken. Curiosity got the better of me, and before I knew it, I was descending the stairs. Each step echoed off the stone walls, and the further I went, the darker it became. The light from the platform above quickly disappeared, leaving me in near complete darkness. But instead of turning back, I pressed on. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in an abandoned part of the subway that I didn't know existed. The air down there was thick, musty, and it smelled like something long forgotten. I pulled out my phone and used its flashlight to guide me. The tunnel stretched out before me, lined with old, decaying bricks. It was eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of dripping water in the distance. As I walked deeper into the tunnel, I began to feel watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, but there was nothing behind me. At least, not that I could see. But then, I heard a soft whisper, just behind my ear. I froze in place, my heart racing. The whisper was faint, like the wind passing through cracks in the walls, but it carried a distinct word, "Go back." I should have listened. I should have turned around right then and there. But I didn't. The further I ventured into the tunnel, the more the atmosphere changed. It wasn't just cold anymore, it was oppressive, like the air itself was pushing down on me. My phone's flashlight flickered briefly, and for a moment, I was plunged into darkness. When the light came back, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing just a few meters ahead of me, barely illuminated by my light, was a figure. At first, I thought it was a homeless person who had wandered into the abandoned tunnel. But as I focused, I realized something was wrong. The figure wasn't moving. It was a woman. Her long, black hair hung down, obscuring her face. She was wearing a dress, an old, tattered thing that looked like it belonged in another century. But what unnerved me the most was the way she stood unnaturally still, as if she were frozen in time. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" No response. I took a cautious step forward, and as I did, my phone flickered again. The light dimmed, then went out completely. I cursed under my breath, frantically tapping at the screen to get it back on. When the light finally returned, she was gone. A cold shiver ran down my spine. I quickly scanned the area with my light, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to get out of that tunnel as fast as possible, but my legs wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, gripped by an overwhelming sense of dread. And then I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was nothing there. The tunnel was empty, but the sensation remained, the feeling that someone, or something, was right behind me, watching. That's when I heard the whisper again, clearer this time, leave. I didn't need to be told twice. I turned and bolted back toward the stairs, my footsteps echoing loudly in the tunnel. The cold, oppressive air seemed to follow me, closing in with every step. When I finally reached the gate, I slammed it shut behind me and ran up the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I was back on the crowded platform, surrounded by the familiar noise of the subway. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had brought something back with me. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself that what I had experienced in the tunnel was just a trick of the mind, stress, fatigue. Maybe even a mild hallucination brought on by the stale air down there. But deep down, I knew better. It started with the dreams. Every night, I would dream of the woman. She would stand at the foot of my bed, her hair covering her face, her presence filling the room with an unbearable cold. I would try to move, try to scream, but I was always paralyzed, trapped in the dream. And then there were the noises. At first, it was subtle, just faint whispers, barely audible, that I could easily dismiss as my mind playing tricks. But soon, they became louder, more insistent. I would wake up in the middle of the night to the sound of footsteps pacing back and forth outside my bedroom door. Sometimes, I would hear the rustling of fabric, like someone was standing just outside my line of sight. One night, I awoke to find my bedroom door wide open. I was certain I had closed it before going to bed. As I lay there, staring at the dark hallway beyond, I felt that same oppressive presence I had felt in the tunnel. The air was cold, and the whisper came again, louder this time, leave. I didn't know what to do. I was afraid to go back to the subway station, but staying in my apartment felt just as dangerous. The haunting wasn't confined to the tunnel anymore, it had followed me home. Desperate for answers, I began researching the subway station, hoping to find some explanation for what was happening to me. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. The station had a dark history, one that had been buried beneath years of modernization and expansion. Decades ago, during the station's construction, a series of accidents had occurred. Workers had reported seeing strange figures in the tunnels, hearing voices, and feeling a suffocating presence. Several workers had died under mysterious circumstances, and the project was delayed for years. Rumor had it that the land the station was built on had once been the site of a large graveyard, dating back to the 1800s. When the city expanded, the graves were supposedly moved, but many believed that not all the bodies had been properly relocated. Some said that the spirits of the restless dead still lingered beneath the city, trapped in the old tunnels and passageways that had been sealed off. I found old news articles about strange disappearances at the station, commuters who had entered but were never seen again. Their bodies were never found, and the cases remained unsolved. And then there were the reports of the woman. Descriptions of her matched what I had seen in the tunnel: long black hair, a tattered dress, and an unsettling stillness. She had been spotted multiple times over the years, always in the same part of the station, near the old gate and staircase that led to the abandoned tunnels. The more I read, the more I realized that I had stumbled into something far darker than I could have imagined. The woman wasn't just a ghost, she was a remnant of something ancient, something that had been disturbed when the station was built. And now, she was haunting me. The dreams became worse. Every night, the woman would get closer. She no longer stood at the foot of my bed. Now, she hovered over me, her cold breath on my face. I could see her more clearly, but I wished I couldn't. Her face was pale, gaunt, with hollow, lifeless eyes. Her lips were cracked, twisted into a permanent, grotesque smile. I stopped sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel her presence. She was always there, just out of sight, waiting. My apartment became a prison. The walls seemed to close in on me, and the whispers never stopped. One night, I heard footsteps in my living room. I grabbed a flashlight and crept out of bed, my heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the living room, I saw her standing in the corner, her back to me. I shined the light on her, but she didn't move. The air was so cold I could see my breath, and the whispers were louder than ever. Leave. I ran. By this point, I knew I couldn't handle this on my own. I contacted a paranormal investigator, a man named ADI, who specialized in hauntings and supernatural occurrences. He listened to my story without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with every detail. "You've encountered something very old," he said when I finished. "This isn't just a restless spirit. What you saw in the tunnel, it's tied to the land, to the history of that place. And it's not going to stop until it gets what it wants." "What does it want?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. ADI shook his head. "That's what we need to find out." ADI and I returned to the subway station late at night when it was nearly empty. He brought with him various tools, candles, incense, and a small book filled with ancient symbols and chants. We descended the stairs together, back into the abandoned tunnel. The air was colder than ever, and the oppressive presence was almost unbearable. ADI lit the candles and began to chant, his voice echoing off the walls. As he chanted, the whispers grew louder, filling the tunnel with their dissonant tones. And then, she appeared. The woman stepped out of the shadows, her black hair hanging in front of her face. She moved slowly toward us, her feet barely touching the ground. ADI continued to chant, his voice steady, but I could see the strain on his face. The woman stopped just a few feet away from us, her head tilting slightly as if she were listening. For a moment, everything was still. And then, she screamed. The scream was like nothing I had ever heard before. were inhuman, filled with rage and pain. The candles flickered violently, and the air around us seemed to ripple with dark energy. "Run!" ADI shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me toward the stairs. We bolted up the steps, the sound of the woman's scream echoing behind us. As we reached the top, I glanced back and saw her standing at the bottom of the stairs, her hollow eyes fixed on me. Her mouth was twisted into that same grotesque smile, and I knew she wasn't going to stop. We barely made it out of the station before the oppressive presence lifted. Outside, in the cold night air, I could finally breathe again. But I knew this wasn't over. ADI and I regrouped at his office, trying to figure out our next move. He explained that the ritual had been meant to bind the spirit, to prevent her from following me, but something had gone wrong. "She's stronger than I thought," ADI said, his face pale. "Whatever happened in that tunnel, it's given her power. She's feeding off the energy of the land, the people, the fear. And now, she's fixated on you. What do we do?" I asked, dreading the answer. "There's only one way to stop her," he said grimly. "We have to sever her connection to this world. We have to go back." We returned to the station one last time. This time, ADI brought more than just candles and incense. He brought a ritual dagger, a relic from ancient times, said to have the power to cut through the veil between the living and the dead. As we descended into the tunnel, the air grew colder than ever. The whispers were deafening now, filling my head with their maddening chorus. At the far end of the tunnel, she waited. The woman stood in the darkness, her pale face illuminated by the faint light of our candles. Her hollow eyes locked onto mine, and I could feel the weight of her presence pressing down on me. ADI began the ritual, chanting louder than before, his voice straining against the oppressive atmosphere. The woman moved closer, her steps slow and deliberate. I could feel her cold breath on my skin as she leaned in, her cracked lips parting to whisper one final word. "Stay." But this time, I didn't run. With a surge of determination, I grabbed the dagger from ADI and plunged it into the ground at her feet. The tunnel seemed to tremble, and for a brief moment, the whispers stopped. The woman let out a final, ear-piercing scream as her form began to dissolve, fading into the shadows from which she had come. And then, there was silence. The haunting was over, but the experience had left its mark on me. I could still feel the cold in my bones, still hear the faint echoes of the whispers in the quiet moments of the night. I moved out of my apartment, left the city altogether, hoping to leave the memories behind. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I swear I can still feel her watching. Some things never truly leave.